The dust cloud on the horizon had grown smaller with each passing hour, until Willa Sinclair could no longer convince herself it was merely traveling slow. She stood in the middle of the empty prairie, her traveling dress torn at the hem, her dark hair escaping its pins in wild tendrils around her face, and watched the last trace of the wagon train disappear into the shimmering heat of the August afternoon. They had left her behind. Actually left her behind. The reality of it settled over her like a shroud as she turned in a slow circle, seeing nothing but endless grassland in every direction under the brutal Colorado sun. It had been a simple mistake, or so she had thought. The wagon train had stopped for the noon rest near a creek, and Willa had wandered just a bit too far looking for a private place to attend to personal needs. When she heard the crack of whips and the shouts of the wagon master, she had run back as fast as her legs could carry her, but the train was already moving. She had screamed and waved her arms, but the dust and distance must have hidden her from view. Or perhaps, a darker thought whispered, they simply had not cared to look back. She was traveling alone, a young woman of 23 with no family after fever took her parents in Kansas City. The other families on the train had been polite but distant, and the wagon master had made it clear he considered single women more trouble than they were worth. Now she stood alone somewhere in the Colorado Territory in 1875, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small canteen she had been carrying. No food, no blanket, no weapon. The enormity of her situation began to sink in as the sun beat down mercilessly. She could try to follow the wagon tracks, but on foot she would never catch them. She could stay where she was and hope they realized their mistake and sent someone back, but hours had already passed and no one had come. Or she could pick a direction and walk, though to where she had no idea. Willa fought back the tears that threatened to fall. Crying would do nothing but waste water. She needed to think clearly, to be practical. The wagon train had been heading west toward the mining towns, following the Arkansas River Valley. If she could find the river, she could follow it to a town. But which direction was the river from here? She turned slowly again, searching for any landmark, any clue. The land rolled gently in every direction, covered in brown grass and scattered sage. In the distance to the west, purple mountains rose against the sky, their peaks still touched with snow even in August. She started walking west, toward the mountains. It seemed as good a direction as any, and she remembered the wagon master saying they would be skirting the Rockies. Her practical boots, at least, were sturdy, made for the journey. She took small sips from her canteen, knowing she needed to make the water last. The sun began its descent toward the mountains, and while the heat lessened slightly, Willa's legs ached and her throat felt parched despite the water she had drunk. She had been walking for hours when she heard it, a sound that made her blood run cold. The howl of a coyote, answered by another, then another. Panic seized her chest. She had heard the stories around the campfires at night about wolves and coyotes that would track vulnerable prey. She looked around desperately for shelter, but there was nothing. Not a tree, not a rock formation, nothing. The howls came again, closer now. Willa began to run, her exhausted legs protesting, her breath coming in gasps. She did not know where she was running to, only that she had to move, had to get away from those sounds. The sun was setting fast now, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. That was when she heard different sounds. The thunder of hooves against earth. Willa spun around and saw him, a figure on horseback riding hard in her direction, silhouetted against the setting sun. For a moment fear paralyzed her, unsure if this new threat was worse than the coyotes, but as he drew closer she could make out more details. A man, tall in the saddle, wearing a dark hat pulled low. He rode a powerful bay horse that ate up the ground with long strides. He pulled up beside her in a spray of dust, and Willa found herself looking up into a face that was all hard angles and sun-bronzed skin, with eyes the color of storm clouds. "Those coyotes are getting brave," he said, his voice a deep rumble. He looked past her toward where the howls still echoed in the gathering dusk, then back at her. His gaze swept over her, taking in her torn dress, her disheveled appearance, the panic that must have been clear on her face. "You alone out here?" "The wagon train," Willa managed to say, her voice hoarse from dust and fear. "They left me behind." Something flickered in those gray eyes, anger perhaps, or disgust at the wagon train's carelessness. He looked around again at the empty prairie, then back at her. The coyotes howled again, much closer now. Without another word, he held out his hand to her. "Climb on," he said firmly. "You are coming with me." Willa did not hesitate. She grabbed his hand and felt the strength in it as he pulled her up behind him in one smooth motion. The horse shifted under the added weight, but did not protest. She wrapped her arms around the man's waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt, and held on tight as he turned the horse and kicked it into a gallop. The world became a blur of motion and fading light as they raced across the prairie. Willa pressed her face against his back, breathing in the scent of leather and horse and something uniquely him, focusing on the steady rhythm of the horse's gait rather than the fear that still pulsed through her veins. They rode for what felt like an hour, though it was hard to judge time in her exhausted state. The sky had turned from red to purple to deep blue by the time Willa saw lights ahead. A town, she thought with relief, but as they drew closer, she realized it was smaller than that. A ranch, with a main house and several outbuildings scattered around it. The man slowed the horse to a walk as they entered the property, and a dog ran out to greet them, barking excitedly. "Quiet, Sam," the man said, and the dog immediately stopped barking, though its tail continued to wag furiously. He brought the horse to a stop in front of the main house and dismounted with easy grace, then reached up to help Willa down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground and his hand stayed on her waist, steadying her. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "This morning," Willa said, "before we stopped at the creek." He nodded and released her, but stayed close as if worried she might fall. "Come inside. We will get you fed and figure out what to do next." The house was simple but well kept, with solid furniture and a large stone fireplace. The man lit a lamp, and in the golden light, Willa got her first good look at her rescuer. He was probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. He was tall and broad-shouldered, built like someone who worked hard for a living. There was something about the way he moved, a quiet confidence that suggested he was a man who could handle whatever life threw at him. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair at a wooden table. "I will make you something." "I do not want to be any trouble," Willa started, but he cut her off with a look. "You think I would leave you out there to be coyote food? Sit down." She sat. He moved around the kitchen area with surprising efficiency for a man living alone, building up the fire in the cast iron stove and pulling out supplies. Within minutes, he had bacon sizzling in a pan and was mixing up something that looked like biscuit dough. "I am Willa," she said into the silence. "Willa Sinclair." He glanced at her over his shoulder. "Hayes Jennings. This is my ranch about 10 miles south of Salida." "Salida," Willa repeated. That was where the wagon train was heading, at least part way. Most of the families were going on to California, but I was planning to stop in Salida. "What is in Salida for you?" Hayes asked, his attention on the food he was preparing. "A job, I hope. I am a teacher. I was told they might need one in the mining towns." He made a sound that might have been acknowledgement and flipped the bacon. Willa watched him work, her fear slowly being replaced by exhaustion. The warmth of the house, the smell of cooking food, the simple fact of being safe after hours of terror, all of it combined to make her feel like she could sleep for a week. Hayes set a plate in front of her laden with bacon, biscuits, and beans heated from a can. It was simple food, but it looked like a feast to Willa's starving eyes. He poured her water from a pitcher and then made himself a plate and sat down across from her. "Eat," he said. "We can talk after." Willa needed no encouragement. She ate with single-minded focus, barely tasting the food in her hunger. Hayes ate at a more measured pace, watching her with those steady gray eyes. When she finally pushed back her empty plate, she felt almost human again. "Thank you," she said. "You saved my life out there." "Those coyotes probably would not have attacked," Hayes said, though his tone suggested he was not entirely sure. "But you would not have survived the night regardless. It gets cold out here once the sun goes down, even in August. And if you had kept walking, you might have ended up somewhere even worse." "How did you find me?" Willa asked. "I saw the wagon train pass through my land this morning. This afternoon I was checking on my cattle in the north pasture and I saw you walking. At first I thought you were some fool wandering where they should not be, but then I saw the fear on your face and heard the coyotes. Did not take much to figure out what happened." "I am very grateful," Willa said. "I do not know how I can repay you." "No payment needed," Hayes said gruffly. He stood and began clearing the plates. "You can sleep in the spare room tonight. Tomorrow I will take you into Salida. It is about an hour ride from here." "Is there a hotel where I can stay?" Willa asked, then realized the problem. "Oh, I have no money. It was all in my trunk on the wagon." "Did you have much?" "Everything I own in the world. My teaching certificates, my mother's Bible, the money I saved working in Kansas City, all my clothes. Everything." The bitterness in her voice surprised even herself. Hayes turned to look at her, and she saw something like understanding in his eyes. "You have had a rough day," he said. "Get some rest. Things will look better in the morning." He showed her to a small bedroom that held a narrow bed, a washstand, and not much else. But to Willa, it looked as welcoming as the finest hotel room. Hayes brought her water for washing and a blanket, then left her alone. She washed the dust from her face and hands, then lay down on the bed still fully clothed. She meant to stay awake and think about what she would do next, but exhaustion claimed her within minutes. She woke to morning light streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. For a moment she was disoriented, forgetting where she was. Then the previous day came rushing back. She sat up, smoothing her hair as best she could, and went to find Hayes. He was in the kitchen, frying eggs and potatoes. He glanced up when she entered and nodded toward the table where a cup of coffee waited. Willa sat and wrapped her hands around the warm cup, inhaling the bitter aroma. "Sleep well?" Hayes asked. "Better than I have in weeks," Willa admitted. The wagon was not exactly comfortable. He set a plate of food in front of her and took his own seat. They ate in companionable silence. Willa found herself studying him in the morning light. He really was quite handsome in a rough, weathered way. There were small scars on his hands, the marks of hard work. His eyes, which had seemed cold last night, were softer this morning, the gray warmer somehow. "After breakfast I will saddle up and we can head to Salida," Hayes said. "I know the sheriff there. He is a good man. He might have some ideas about what you can do." "I hate to impose on you further," Willa said. "It is no imposition. I was planning to go to town anyway, need supplies." After they finished eating, Hayes went out to saddle his horse while Willa tidied the kitchen. It seemed the least she could do. When she stepped outside, she got her first good look at the ranch in daylight. It was a beautiful piece of land, nestled in a valley with mountains rising in the distance. She could see cattle grazing in the far pastures and several horses in a corral near the barn. Hayes led his bay horse over, and Willa noticed he had also saddled a smaller chestnut mare. "Thought you might prefer your own horse for the ride," he said. "Ruby here is gentle as a kitten." "I appreciate that," Willa said, though in truth she was not much of a rider. She had learned the basics as a girl but had not been on a horse in years. Still, she managed to mount with only a little awkwardness, and Ruby stood patiently through her fumbling. They set out at an easy pace, following a well-worn trail that led north. The morning was beautiful, cool and clear, with birds singing in the scattered trees. Hayes rode slightly ahead, occasionally pointing out landmarks. Willa found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the ride, enjoying the peaceful morning despite her uncertain situation. "How long have you had the ranch?" she asked. "About 5 years. Bought it with money I saved working cattle drives. It is not much, but it is mine. It seems like a good piece of land." "It is. Good water, good grass. I run about 200 head of cattle, raise a few horses, make enough to get by." He glanced back at her. "What about you? How did you end up on a wagon train to Colorado?" Willa told him about her parents dying, about the teaching position in Kansas City that had ended when the school closed, about the advertisement she had seen for teachers needed in the mining towns of Colorado. "I sold everything and bought passage on the wagon train. Thought I was starting a new life." "You still can," Hayes said. "Salada needs teachers. My brother's kids have been going to a one-room school that is overcrowded and understaffed. You have your certificates. They were in my trunk." "Can you prove your qualifications some other way?" Willa thought for a moment. "I could wire the school board in Kansas City. They might send confirmation of my employment there." "That is a start." They rode in silence for a while, then Hayes pointed ahead. "Salada is just over that rise." The town came into view as they crested a hill, spread out along the Arkansas River. It was bigger than Willa had expected, with a main street lined with buildings and several side streets branching off. She could see the river sparkling in the sunlight and the mountains rising beyond. It looked like a place where someone could build a life. Hayes led them down the main street, nodding to people who called out greetings. Clearly he was well known here. He stopped in front of a building with a sign that reads Sheriff's Office and dismounted, then helped Willa down from Ruby. Inside, a man with a silver star on his chest looked up from a desk covered in papers. He was perhaps 50, with gray threading through his dark hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "Hayes," he said in greeting, then his gaze shifted to Willa with curiosity. "Who is your companion?" "This is Miss Willa Sinclair. She was left behind by a wagon train yesterday. Found her on my north pasture with coyotes closing in." The sheriff's expression darkened. "Left behind? Which train?" "The Donovan train," Willa said. "We were heading toward California, but I was planning to stop here." "I know Donovan. He passed through yesterday morning, did not mention leaving anyone behind." The sheriff's tone made it clear what he thought of that. "I am Sheriff Marcus Kane. Please, sit down and tell me what happened." Willa related the story again, and Sheriff Kane listened with a deepening frown. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. "That man should not be leading wagon trains," he said flatly. "This is not the first time I have heard complaints about him. The problem is he will be long gone by now. Probably not even worth sending a telegram." He looked at Willa with sympathy. "I am sorry, miss. Your belongings are likely lost. Best we can hope for is that someone on the train has a conscience and will bring your trunk back eventually, but I would not count on it." Willa nodded, trying not to let her disappointment show. She had already known it was unlikely she would get her things back, but hearing it confirmed still hurt. Miss Sinclair was hoping to find a teaching position here, Hayes said. Her certificates were in her trunk, but she worked as a teacher in Kansas City. She can wire for confirmation. A teacher, Sheriff Kane's expression brightened. That is fortunate timing. Mrs. Henderson, who runs the school, was just saying last week that they desperately need another teacher. With all the mining families moving in, they have more students than they can handle. He pulled out a piece of paper and wrote something down. This is Mrs. Henderson's address. She lives just 2 streets over in a white house with blue shutters. Tell her I sent you. Thank you, Willa said, taking the paper. Hope sparked in her chest. Maybe things would work out after all. As for a place to stay, the sheriff continued, there is a boarding house on Maple Street run by Mrs. Patterson. She is respectable and her rates are fair. Tell her I sent you and to put it on account until you get your first pay. I cannot accept charity, Willa protested. It is not charity, it is common sense. You will pay her back once you are working. This town takes care of its own, Miss Sinclair, and anyone who survives being left in the wilderness and has the gumption to immediately look for work rather than fall apart is welcome here as far as I am concerned. Willa felt tears prick her eyes at the kindness. Thank you, Sheriff Kane. Thank you so much. They left the sheriff's office with directions to both Mrs. Henderson's house and the boarding house. Hayes walked beside her, leading the horses. You want to try the school first? He asked. I should probably clean up before I present myself as a teacher, Willa said ruefully, looking down at her stained and torn dress. The boarding house, then, Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a plump, cheerful woman in her 60s who took one look at Willa's bedraggled state and immediately ushered her inside. When Hayes explained the situation and mentioned Sheriff Kane, Mrs. Patterson nodded vigorously. Of course, of course. Poor dear. What an ordeal. I have a nice room on the 2nd floor. Come, I will show you. The room was small but clean, with a real bed, a dresser, and a washstand. There was even a vase of dried flowers on the windowsill. To Willa, who had spent weeks sleeping in a crowded wagon, it looked like paradise. Now, you are about the same size as my daughter, Mrs. Patterson said, eyeing Willa critically. She left some dresses when she got married and moved to Denver. I will bring them up and you can see if any fit. You cannot go around in that torn thing. I could not possibly, Willa started, but Mrs. Patterson waved her off. Nonsense. They are just taking up space. Now I will heat some water for washing. You must be desperate for a bath. She bustled out, and Willa sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the kindness of strangers. Hayes lingered in the doorway, his hat in his hands. Looks like you are all set, he said. Mrs. Patterson will take good care of you. Thank you, Hayes, for everything. I do not know what would have happened if you had not found me. Glad I was there, he said simply. He turned to go, then hesitated. If things do not work out with the teaching position, or if you need anything, my ranch is about an hour south. Anyone in town can give you directions. I hope I will not need to impose on you again, but thank you. He nodded and left. Willa watched from the window as he mounted his horse and rode down the street, feeling an unexpected pang of loss, which was ridiculous. She had known the man for less than 24 hours. But he had saved her life and shown her kindness when she desperately needed it, and she found herself hoping she would see him again. Mrs. Patterson returned with a hip bath and several buckets of hot water, along with an armful of dresses. She helped Willa get settled, then left her to bathe in privacy. Willa sank into the warm water with a sigh of pure bliss, scrubbing away the dust and fear of the previous day. When she finally emerged and dressed in one of the borrowed dresses, a simple blue calico that fit reasonably well, she felt like a new person. She pinned her hair up properly, borrowing pins from the collection Mrs. Patterson had thoughtfully left and looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. She looked tired, with circles under her eyes and a sunburn on her nose, but she looked presentable. That would have to do. Mrs. Henderson's house was easy to find, and Willa took a deep breath before knocking on the door. A woman in her 50s answered, gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, wire-rimmed spectacles perched on her nose. She looked Willa up and down with the sharp assessment of someone used to sizing people up quickly. "Yes, Mrs. Henderson. My name is Willa Sinclair. Sheriff Kane sent me. I am a teacher and I heard you might need one." Mrs. Henderson's stern expression softened slightly. "A teacher. Come in, come in." Over tea in Mrs. Henderson's tidy parlor, Willa explained her situation for what felt like the 100th time. Mrs. Henderson listened carefully, asking pointed questions about Willa's education and experience. By the time they finished, Willa felt as though she had been through an examination, which in a way she had. "Your qualifications seem sound," Mrs. Henderson said finally. "Obviously, I will need to verify them, but if everything you have told me is true, I would very much like to offer you a position. We currently have one schoolhouse with 47 students ranging from ages 5 to 14. It is chaos trying to teach them all together. I have been managing with help from 2 older students, but it is not ideal. With you, we could split into 2 groups. I would take the younger children, you would take the older ones. The pay is $40 a month, plus you would have Saturdays and Sundays off. $40 a month." It was not a fortune, but it was enough to live on and pay back Mrs. Patterson. Willa felt relief flood through her. "I accept," she said. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. You will not regret this." "I certainly hope not. When can you start?" "Whenever you need me." "Monday, then." "That gives you a few days to settle in and prepare. The school is the building with the bell tower on Oak Street. Come at 7 in the morning and we will go over the curriculum and supplies." Willa left Mrs. Henderson's house feeling like she was floating. Against all odds, things were working out. She had a place to stay, a job, and was in a town that seemed welcoming. True, she had lost everything she owned, but she was alive and had a chance to start over. That was more than she had dared to hope for yesterday when she stood alone on the prairie. She spent the rest of the day exploring Salida, familiarizing herself with the layout of the town. It was a bustling place, full of miners and their families, merchants, cattle ranchers coming in for supplies, and all the varied characters that populated a frontier town. She walked past the general store, the saloon, the church, the assayer's office. People nodded to her in passing, curious about the stranger but friendly enough. As she walked, she found her thoughts drifting to Hayes Jennings. She wondered what he was doing back at his ranch, if he was thinking about her at all, or if he had already put the incident out of his mind. She hoped she would have a chance to thank him properly, to somehow repay his kindness. But their worlds seemed unlikely to intersect again. He was a rancher living miles out of town, and she would be busy with teaching. Still, she could not quite shake the memory of his steady gray eyes or the feeling of safety she had felt with his arms around her as they rode across the prairie. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Willa borrowed books from Mrs. Henderson and spent hours planning lessons. She explored more of Salida and its surroundings, wanting to understand the place that would be her new home. She got to know some of the other residents, including several families with children who would be her students. Everyone was welcoming, and Willa began to feel like she might actually belong here. On Monday morning, she arrived at the schoolhouse at 7 sharp, nervous but excited. Mrs. Henderson was already there, and together they organized the space and went over expectations. When the children began arriving at 8, Willa felt her heart lift. This was what she loved, what she was meant to do. The children were curious about their new teacher, eyeing her with everything from shyness to bold assessment. Willa introduced herself and then dove into the work of teaching, and the morning flew by in a happy blur. At lunch, she stepped outside to get some air and saw a familiar figure riding down the street. Hayes Jennings, sitting tall on his bay horse. Her heart gave an unexpected leap. He saw her and changed direction, riding over to the schoolhouse. "Miss Sinclair," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "How are you settling in?" "Very well, thank you. I started teaching today." "So I heard. My brother's kids came home talking about their new teacher last night. He mentioned at dinner that they were excited. Your brother lives in town." "Yes, he runs the general store. He is married with 3 children. They are good kids. I look forward to teaching them." Willa felt suddenly shy, aware of the children watching from the windows behind her. "Thank you again for everything you did. I owe you my life." "You owe me nothing," Hayes said firmly. "I am just glad you are doing well." He hesitated, then added, "I come to town most Saturdays for supplies. Perhaps I could call on you sometime, see how you are getting on." Willa's heart beat faster. "I would like that very much." Something warm flickered in his eyes. "Saturday, then. I will find you at the boarding house." He tipped his hat again and rode off, and Willa went back inside feeling like she was walking on air. Mrs. Henderson gave her a knowing look but said nothing, and Willa threw herself back into teaching with renewed energy. Saturday seemed both forever away and to arrive too quickly. Willa found herself trying on different dresses that morning, borrowed from Mrs. Patterson's daughter's collection, trying to decide what looked best. Finally, she settled on a green one that brought out the color of her eyes and made her feel pretty. She told herself she was being ridiculous, that this was just a friendly visit, but she could not quite convince herself. Hayes arrived at the boarding house just after noon, looking freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. He offered his arm, and they walked down to the small restaurant on Main Street. Over lunch, they talked easily, discussing her first week of teaching, his work on the ranch, the town and its characters. Willa found herself laughing at his dry observations, enjoying his quiet sense of humor. He was not a talkative man, but when he spoke, it was thoughtful and genuine. "Do you have family in the area?" Willa asked. "Besides your brother, I mean." "No, it is just the 2 of us. Our parents died when we were young, cholera. We were raised by an uncle in Kansas. He was a hard man but fair, taught us to work and to value honest dealing. When we were old enough, we headed out here to make our own way." He took a sip of coffee. "My brother Henry always wanted to be a merchant. He is good at it, good with people. I wanted land, space to breathe, so we saved until we could each afford what we wanted." "Do you get lonely out there on your ranch by yourself?" Hayes considered the question. "Sometimes, but I have always been comfortable with solitude. I have my dog, my horses, the cattle. It is enough most days." He looked at her with those steady gray eyes. "What about you? Do you miss Kansas City?" "Not really. There is nothing there for me anymore. I miss my parents, but they have been gone for 3 years now. I am ready for a new beginning." "Seems like you have made a good start." They finished lunch and Hayes walked her back to the boarding house. At the door he paused. "I enjoyed today," he said. "Could I call on you again? Next Saturday, perhaps?" "I would like that," Willa said softly. His face broke into a rare smile and Willa's breath caught. He really was handsome when he smiled. He touched his hat and left, and Willa went inside feeling like the world had suddenly become brighter. Over the following weeks, Saturday became the day Willa looked forward to most. Hayes rode into town every week without fail, and they would spend the afternoon together. Sometimes they had lunch. Sometimes they just walked around town or sat by the river and talked. Willa learned more about him with each visit. His love of the land, his quiet determination to build something lasting, his dry humor and unexpected kindness. He, in turn, seemed genuinely interested in her life, asking about her students and her work, listening with real attention. The other townsfolk noticed, of course. In a small community like Salida, little went unnoticed. Mrs. Patterson commented cheerfully that it was nice to see Willa making friends, and several of the mothers mentioned that Hayes Jennings was a fine man, steady and hardworking. Willa began to realize that people were watching with approval, that they saw Hayes's attention to her as courtship. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. One Saturday in late September, Hayes suggested they take a ride outside of town. The aspens were turning gold on the mountainsides, and he wanted to show her a place he thought she would like. Willa agreed, and Hayes brought Ruby for her to ride. They headed south out of town, following the river valley. The day was perfect, crisp and clear, the sky an impossible blue. They rode for about an hour before Hayes turned off the main trail and led them up into the hills. They emerged in a meadow surrounded by aspen groves, the trees brilliant gold against the blue sky. A stream ran through the center of the meadow and wildflowers still bloomed in scattered patches. It was breathtakingly beautiful. "Oh, Hayes," Willa breathed. "This is incredible." "I thought you might like it," he said, dismounting. He helped her down and they let the horses graze while they walked to the stream. They sat on the bank and Willa pulled off her boots to dip her feet in the cold water. "This is part of your ranch?" she asked. "The western border runs through here. This is one of my favorite spots. I come here sometimes when I need to think." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the water and the wind in the aspens. Finally, Hayes spoke. "Willa, I need to tell you something." She looked at him, suddenly nervous at his serious tone. "When I found you out on the prairie that day, I thought you were just another problem to solve, someone who needed help, and I was in a position to provide it. That is all." He paused, looking out over the meadow. "But getting to know you these past weeks, spending time with you, I have realized something. You are not a problem. You are a gift." Willa's heart pounded. "I am not good with words," Hayes continued. "I am better with actions, with doing rather than saying. But I want you to know that I have come to care for you deeply, more than I thought I could care for anyone. When I am on the ranch during the week, I count the days until Saturday when I can see you again. When I am with you, everything feels right in a way it never has before." He turned to look at her, and the emotion in his eyes took her breath away. "I know we have not known each other long. I know you are just starting to build a life here, but I need to know if there is any chance that you might feel the same way. Because if there is, I would like to court you properly, with the intention of asking you to be my wife when the time is right." Willa felt tears slip down her cheeks. "Hayes, I have been half in love with you since the moment you pulled me onto your horse and saved my life. These past weeks, getting to know you, seeing your kindness and your strength and your goodness, I have fallen the rest of the way. So yes, there is more than a chance. I care for you too, very much." The smile that broke across his face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He reached out and cupped her face gently, wiping away her tears with his thumb. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. "Please," Willa whispered. He leaned in and pressed his lips to hers, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. Willa felt like her whole body was on fire, every nerve singing. She had been kissed before, awkward fumbling attempts by boys back in Kansas City, but nothing like this. This felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," Hayes admitted. "Why did you wait so long?" Willa asked, then blushed at her boldness. "Wanted to do things properly. You deserve to be courted right, not rushed." He kissed her again, softer this time. "But I am glad the waiting is over." They spent the rest of the afternoon in the meadow, talking and kissing and making plans. Hayes told her about his dreams for the ranch, about wanting to expand his herd and maybe breed horses. Willa told him about her hopes for her students, about wanting to make a real difference in their education. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other in the way of new lovers. As the sun began to set, they reluctantly mounted up and headed back to town. Hayes left her at the boarding house with a lingering kiss and a promise to see her soon. "I will come Wednesday if I can get away," he said. "I do not want to wait a whole week." "I will be here," Willa said, smiling up at him. Over the following months, their relationship deepened. Hayes did come on Wednesday that week and many weeks after. They became a fixture in town, the school teacher and the rancher, and people smiled to see them together. In October, Hayes formally asked Willa's permission to court her with the intention of marriage, a formality since they were already doing so, but Willa appreciated the gesture. Winter came to the Colorado mountains with a vengeance, and there were weeks when Hayes could not make it to town because of snow. Those were hard times for Willa, who missed him terribly. But he sent letters with anyone heading to town, sweet, awkward letters that revealed his heart, and she treasured every word on Christmas Eve. Hayes made it to town despite the snow, arriving at the boarding house with ice in his beard and cold reddening his face. Mrs. Patterson let him in and fetched Willa, smiling knowingly. Hayes asked if Willa would take a walk with him, and she bundled up in her warmest cloak. He led her to the church, which was lit up for the Christmas Eve service. Instead of going inside, he took her around to the side where they could see through the windows to the nativity scene set up inside. Candles glowed warmly, and the scene was peaceful and beautiful. "I wanted to do this somewhere special," Hayes said. He took both her hands in his, and Willa saw that, despite the cold, his hands were shaking. "Willa Sinclair, I love you. I have loved you since that day in the meadow, probably before if I am honest. You have brought light and joy into my life in ways I never imagined possible. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy if you will let me." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a simple gold band with a small diamond, clearly old. "This was my mother's ring," Hayes said, "the only thing I have of hers. I would be honored if you would wear it. Willa, will you marry me?" "Yes," Willa said, tears freezing on her cheeks in the cold air. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Hayes slipped the ring on her finger and it fit perfectly. He kissed her deeply, and Willa thought she had never been happier in her entire life. They went to the Christmas Eve service together, sitting close in the crowded church, and Willa sent up a prayer of thanks for the wagon train that had left her behind, for the cowboy who had saved her, for the strange path that had brought her to this moment. They were married in March, as soon as the mountain passes cleared enough for Hayes's brother and family to make the trip to the church in Salida. It was a simple ceremony but perfect, with Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Henderson and half the town in attendance. Willa wore a dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her make, white with blue ribbon, and carried wildflowers that Hayes had somehow found blooming in a sheltered spot on his ranch. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Hayes kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart overflow. After the ceremony, there was a celebration in the church hall with food and music. Hayes's brother Henry made a toast, welcoming Willa to the family. Several of Willa's students presented her with drawings and poems they had made. Sheriff Kane told embarrassing stories about Hayes from his youth. It was a day full of joy and laughter and community, and Willa realized that she truly had found a home. That evening, Hayes took his bride back to the ranch. As they rode through the twilight, Willa wrapped her arms around her husband's waist and marveled at how much her life had changed. A year ago she had been alone and afraid, abandoned on the prairie with no hope. Now she was married to a man she loved deeply, had work she found meaningful, and was part of a community that had embraced her. The ranch house that had seemed so simple that first night now looked like home. Hayes had clearly made an effort, cleaning thoroughly and picking more wildflowers to put in jars around the rooms. He had even acquired new blankets for the bed and curtains for the windows. Willa looked around with pleasure, already imagining how she would make this space truly theirs. Hayes came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, kissing her neck. "What are you thinking, Mrs. Jennings?" "That I am the luckiest woman alive," Willa said, turning in his arms, "and that I cannot wait to start our life together." "About that," Hayes said, "I know you love teaching. I do not expect you to give it up. We can make it work. I can bring you to town on Monday mornings and pick you up Friday afternoons. You can stay at the boarding house during the week if Mrs. Patterson will have you." Willa's heart swelled at his thoughtfulness. Many men would have expected their wives to give up work immediately, but Hayes understood how important teaching was to her. "Let me talk to Mrs. Henderson," she said. "Perhaps we can work something out. But Hayes, I do not want to spend every night away from you. Maybe I can teach part-time or find a solution closer to home." "We will figure it out together," Hayes said. "We have time." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Willa forgot about teaching and schools and everything else. There was only this moment, this man, this new life beginning. The first year of their marriage was one of adjustment and joy. Willa did work out an arrangement where she taught 3 days a week, with Mrs. Henderson handling the other days. It meant less money, but Willa did not care. The time with Hayes was worth far more. She discovered she loved life on the ranch, loved the rhythm of the seasons and the work that came with each. She learned to help with the cattle, to tend the garden Hayes helped her plant, to preserve food for the winter. It was hard work, so different from the life she had known in Kansas City, but she had never been happier. Hayes, for his part, seemed to grow more open and affectionate with each passing month. The quiet, reserved man who had saved her life slowly revealed layers of warmth and humor and passion. He was endlessly patient with her as she learned ranch skills, praised her efforts, and made her feel valued in every way. At night in their bed, he showed her depths of tenderness and desire that left her breathless. In the fall of their first year of marriage, Willa realized she was pregnant. She was both terrified and thrilled, and when she told Hayes, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, then immediately set her down gently as if she might break. "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly worried. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Hayes said, kneeling down to press a kiss to her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby, our baby. How could I be anything but overjoyed? The pregnancy was not easy." Willa was sick frequently in the first months, and as she grew larger the work on the ranch became more difficult. But Hayes was endlessly supportive, taking on extra tasks without complaint and making sure she rested. Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Henderson visited frequently, bringing advice and baby clothes and support. The whole town seemed invested in the arrival of the Jennings baby. In May of 1877, after a long and difficult labor, Willa gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Samuel, after Hayes's uncle who had raised him, and after the loyal dog who had greeted them that first night. Hayes cried when he held his son for the first time, tears running unashamedly down his face as he marveled at the tiny, perfect person they had created. "Thank you," he whispered to Willa, kissing her forehead. "Thank you for this gift, for choosing me, for building this life with me." "I would choose you 1,000 times over," Willa said, exhausted but happy. You and Samuel are my whole world." Life with a baby was chaotic and exhausting and wonderful. Willa had to give up teaching for a while, focusing on caring for Samuel and managing the household. Hayes was a devoted father, helping with the baby whenever he could, walking the floor with Samuel during colicky nights, changing diapers without complaint. Watching him with their son made Willa fall in love with him all over again. When Samuel was 2, Willa discovered she was pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and while the pregnancy was still difficult, she handled it better. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1879, a beautiful little girl with Hayes's gray eyes and Willa's dark hair. They named her Margaret, after Willa's mother. Hayes was just as besotted with his daughter as he had been with his son. He built toys for the children, read them stories in his deep, steady voice, taught Samuel to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk. Willa watched her family grow with a sense of deep contentment. This life, this family, this man was everything she had never known she wanted. The years passed in a happy blur. The ranch prospered under Hayes's careful management. They expanded the herd, added more horses, built a bigger barn. Samuel grew into a serious little boy who loved helping his father with the ranch work. Margaret was bright and curious, full of questions about everything. Willa returned to teaching part-time when Margaret was old enough, finding joy in balancing her two loves, her family and her students. Hayes's brother Henry and his wife became close friends, and their children grew up together with Samuel and Margaret. The two families celebrated holidays together, helped each other through hard times, rejoiced in good times. Willa had never had much family, but now she was surrounded by people who loved her. In 1883, when Samuel was 6 and Margaret 4, Willa became pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2, perhaps because she was older now, 31, and feeling every year of it. But Hayes was as supportive as ever, and with the help of the children and hired hands he had taken on, they managed. Their second son was born in early 1884, a robust baby with a loud cry and an appetite to match. They named him Thomas, and he seemed determined from birth to make his presence known. Between 3 children and the ranch and teaching, Willa's life was full to overflowing. There were days when she was so tired she could barely stand, but she would not have changed a thing. One evening in the summer of 1885, after the children were in bed, Willa and Hayes sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. These quiet moments together were precious, stolen time in the midst of their busy lives. "You ever think about that day?" Willa asked. "When you found me?" "Sometimes," Hayes said, reaching for her hand. "I think about how close I came to never meeting you. If I had checked a different pasture that day, if I had been even an hour later, if those coyotes had been bolder. So many things that could have gone differently." "Do you believe in fate?" Willa asked. "I do not know. I believe in choices and consequences. I chose to ride out that day. I chose to help you. You chose to trust me to stay in Salida to give me a chance. All those choices led us here." He squeezed her hand. "So maybe that is fate. Or maybe we just got very lucky." "I think it is both," Willa said. She leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him. "That wagon train leaving me behind was the worst day of my life, but it was also the best because it brought me to you." "I am grateful every day for it," Hayes said. "For you, for our children, for this life we built together. I never imagined I could be this happy." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one. In the house behind them, their children slept safely. Around them, the ranch they had built together stretched out in the gathering darkness. And between them was a love that had started with a desperate rescue and grown into something deep and lasting and true. Years continued to pass. each one bringing new challenges and joys. Samuel grew into a young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, already talking about the day he would take it over. Margaret showed a talent for teaching, often helping her mother with the younger students. Thomas, the baby, turned out to have a gift with horses that amazed everyone. Willa watched her children grow with pride and a touch of melancholy. Where had the time gone? It seemed like just yesterday she was standing alone on the prairie, terrified and abandoned. Now she was 43 years old with grown and nearly grown children, silver threading through her dark hair, lines around her eyes from years of smiling. Hayes had aged too, his dark hair now more gray than brown, his face more weathered. But to Willa, he was as handsome as the day he had ridden up and saved her life. More handsome, perhaps, because now she knew the depths of his character, the goodness of his heart. In 1895, Samuel married a girl from town, the daughter of the banker. It was a grand wedding, and Hayes insisted on hosting the reception at the ranch. Willa watched her son dance with his bride and felt bittersweet tears on her cheeks. Hayes came up beside her and wrapped an arm around her waist. "They will be happy," he said softly. "He is a good man." "You raised him well." "We raised him well," Willa corrected. "And yes, they will be happy. I am not sad, just nostalgic. Remember when he was small enough to fit in your arms." "I remember everything," Hayes said. "Every moment of our life together." A year later, Samuel and his wife announced they were expecting a baby. The news that she would be a grandmother made Willa feel both ancient and excited. When the baby arrived in early 1897, a boy they named Hayes after his grandfather, Willa held him and marveled at the circle of life. This tiny person was her grandchild, a new generation, the continuation of the family she and Hayes had created. Margaret announced her engagement that same year to a teacher she had met while working in a school in Denver. The wedding was set for the spring of 1898, and Willa threw herself into preparations with joy. Hayes complained good-naturedly about the cost and chaos, but Willa could see he was just as happy as she was. Thomas, now 14, showed no interest in romance yet, focused entirely on the horses he was training. Hayes had started a horse breeding operation with Thomas's help, and it was proving profitable. The ranch continued to prosper, and Hayes talked about expanding further. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1901, Hayes surprised Willa with a trip back to the meadow where he had proposed all those years ago. The children were old enough to manage without them for a day, and Hayes insisted Willa needed a break from the constant activity of ranch life. They rode out on a beautiful spring morning, just the two of them like they had been so many times before. The meadow was just as lovely as Willa remembered, the aspens budding out in fresh green, wildflowers carpeting the ground. They dismounted and walked to the stream, and Willa pulled off her boots to dip her feet in the water just as she had that first time. 25 years, Hayes said, sitting beside her. "How did that happen so fast?" "I have no idea," Willa said. "But they have been the best 25 years of my life." "Mine too." He pulled a small box from his pocket. "I have something for you." Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant in the shape of a heart. Hayes fastened it around her neck, his fingers gentle. "To replace the ring I gave you when we got engaged," he said, "which you still wear every day, even though it is worn thin." Willa touched her wedding ring, indeed worn smooth from years of wear. "I will never take this off, but I love the necklace, thank you." "Thank you," Hayes said, "for saying yes that Christmas Eve, for building this life with me, for giving me children and a home and more happiness than I ever dreamed possible. I love you, Willa Jennings. I have loved you since the moment I saw you standing alone on that prairie, though I did not know it yet." and I will love you until the day I die." "And I love you," Willa said, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for saving me, not just that day, but every day since. You gave me a life, a family, a home. You gave me everything." They kissed there by the stream, two people who had chosen each other over and over again through the years, whose love had only deepened with time. The sun shone warm on their faces, and the aspens whispered in the breeze, and Willa thought about how grateful she was for every twist and turn that had brought her to this moment. The years continued their march. Margaret married and moved to Denver, but visited often with her growing family. Thomas eventually married as well, a quiet girl from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house on the far side of Hayes's land, expanding the family holdings. Samuel and his wife had 3 more children, and the ranch rang with the laughter of grandchildren. Hayes's brother Henry passed away in 1905, and Hayes took it hard. But he threw himself into helping Henry's wife and now grown children manage the general store, making sure his brother's legacy continued. Willa watched him grieve and helped him through it, just as he had helped her through countless difficulties over the years. That was what marriage was, she realized. Not just the joyful moments, but being there for each other through the hard times too. In 1910, Hayes and Willa celebrated their 37th anniversary quietly at home, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Samuel had taken over most of the ranch operations now, though Hayes still rode out most days, unable to fully give up the work he loved. Willa had finally retired from teaching the year before, her position taken by a young woman who reminded Willa of herself at that age, eager, dedicated, full of dreams. "I cannot believe we are this old," Willa said to Hayes that night as they got ready for bed. "When did we become the elderly generation?" "Gradually, then all at once," Hayes said with a smile. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. They looked at their reflection in the mirror, 2 people in their 60s, gray and lined but still strong. "But I would not change a thing. Every year with you has been a gift, even the hard years," Willa asked, "especially the hard years." "Those were the ones that showed me what we are made of, what we can survive together." They climbed into bed, and Hayes pulled Willa close. This was her favorite part of every day, these quiet moments of intimacy before sleep. After all these years, she still loved the feeling of his arms around her, still found comfort in his steady heartbeat, still marveled that this good, strong man had chosen her. The next decade passed peacefully. The ranch continued to prosper under Samuel's management, with Hayes acting as advisor. The family grew as grandchildren married and had children of their own, making Hayes and Willa great-grandparents. They settled into a comfortable retirement, spending their days working in the garden, taking rides around the ranch, sitting on the porch and watching the world go by. In the summer of 1922, Hayes developed a cough that would not go away. The doctor in Salida looked serious after examining him and recommended they see a specialist in Denver. But Hayes refused, saying he had lived a long, good life and if his time was coming, he wanted to spend it at home on his ranch, not in some hospital far away. The cough worsened through the fall, and by winter Hayes was weak and often confined to bed. Willa nursed him tenderly, refusing to let anyone else take on the task. Their children visited frequently, bringing grandchildren and great-grandchildren to sit with Hayes and hear his stories. He seemed content, often smiling as he looked around at the family he had helped create. On a cold January night in 1923, Hayes took a turn for the worse. The family gathered and Hayes spoke with each of his children, giving them final words of advice and love. When they were alone at last, he reached for Willa's hand. "I am not afraid," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I have had a good life, the best life, because of you. Do not leave me," Willa said, though she knew it was useless. "Please, Hayes, I am not ready. You are the strongest person I know. You will be fine. You have the children, the grandchildren. They will take care of you." He coughed, then continued. "That day I found you on the prairie, I thought I was saving you, but really you saved me. You gave my life meaning and purpose and joy. Thank you for that. Thank you for everything." "I love you," Willa said, tears flowing freely. "I have loved you for 48 years, and I will love you forever. And I love you. Always have, always will." He smiled at her, that same smile that had made her fall in love with him all those years ago. "When you get scared or lonely, go to our meadow. I will be there, I promise." Those were his last words. He closed his eyes and slipped away peacefully, Willa holding his hand. She sat there for a long time, not wanting to let go, not wanting to accept that he was truly gone. Her husband, her love, her partner for nearly half a century. How was she supposed to go on without him? But she did go on, because she was Willa Sinclair Jennings, and she was a survivor. She had survived being abandoned on the prairie, had survived the hardships of frontier life, had survived loss and difficulty and heartbreak. She would survive this too, though part of her had died with Hayes. The funeral was huge, with people coming from all over to pay their respects. Hayes had been well loved in the community, respected for his honesty and hard work and kindness. Willa stood at the graveside with her children around her, watching as they lowered her husband into the ground, and felt like she was watching from a great distance. The weeks after were the hardest. She stayed at the ranch, unable to imagine being anywhere else, but everywhere she looked held memories of Hayes. Samuel and his wife urged her to move in with them, but Willa refused. This was her home, the place she and Hayes had built together. She would not leave it. Spring came, and with it a restlessness Willa could not shake. One morning in May, she saddled up a horse, moving slowly with her 71-year-old joints, and rode out to the meadow. It took longer than it used to, and she had to stop and rest several times, but eventually she made it. The meadow was in full bloom, aspens leafing out in bright green, wildflowers everywhere. Willa dismounted carefully and walked to the stream. She sat down in the spot where Hayes had proposed all those years ago and let the memories wash over her. Their first kiss. The day he asked her to marry him. Their 25th anniversary. So many important moments in this place. She sat there for hours, letting the peace of the meadow seep into her bones. And slowly, she began to feel something shift inside her. Hayes was gone, and she missed him with an ache that would never fully heal. But he had given her so much. A life full of love and purpose. Children and grandchildren who adored her. Memories to treasure for whatever time she had left. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind. "Thank you for riding up that day. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for loving me. I will carry you in my heart until we meet again." She felt a sense of peace settle over her. Hayes was gone, but their love remained, woven into every part of her life, living on in their descendants. That love was eternal, transcending death itself. Willa lived for 7 more years, spending her time with family, tending her garden and making frequent trips to the meadow. She saw Samuel's grandchildren grow up, met great-great-grandchildren, remained a pillar of the family she and Hayes had created. She told stories about the old days, about the Wild West when Colorado was still a frontier, about the day a cowboy rode up and changed her life forever. She passed away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1930 at the age of 78. Her children buried her next to Hayes, and the whole town came out for the funeral. People spoke of her kindness, her dedication to teaching, her strength and grace. But what they remembered most was the love story she and Hayes had lived, a testament to the power of choosing each other every single day. Years later, when people spoke of Willa Sinclair Jennings, they told the story of how she had been left behind by a wagon train in the Colorado wilderness in 1875, alone and terrified, and how a cowboy named Hayes Jennings had ridden up and said 4 simple words that changed both their lives. "Climb on, you are coming with me." From that moment of rescue had grown a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, a family that continued to flourish, and a legacy that endured long after both of them were gone. It was a story of survival and choice, of chance and destiny, of 2 people who found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. And in the end, it was a story that proved that sometimes the worst moment of your life can lead to the very best, if you are brave enough to climb on and hold tight to the person offering their hand.